In this podcast episode, I sit down with Cecilia Curtis and have amazing conversation with her about her journey as a military wife. And I wanted to highlight first responder, military, any kind of line of active duty. Not only is that courageous to serve our country and our community, but also the wives that stand behind them, I don't think get enough praise, encouragement, and honor, to be honest. I think who is kind of keeping the home fire burning at home and who is keeping things going at home while our brave men are out on the lines protecting our community, protecting our country, whatever it might be, I think is just not shined enough light on. And so I enjoyed talking to Cecilia because also her humbleness about her courage. She says, I don't know if this is courage. I don't know if I would consider this her courage. I'm like, of course it's courage. You moved to multiple countries. You've gone through health scares, but navigating them by yourself because your husband was, active duty. He was gone. He was deployed. So I think just how humble she is about her courage is just it was very beautiful to I was grateful to be the one to shed light on how courageous she is. And we talked about how friendships and community are so important in those times of I don't want to say isolation or loneliness, but when your husband is gone and you are the one kind of managing everything, it can get lonely. It can feel isolating. So we did share those experiences in those times and kind of connected on those levels personally as well. And I hope you enjoy this episode. She talked about her perspective and her mindset through these seasons of courage. And I think that that's what got her through in such a positive light. Also, a few things I'd like to mention to you. I'm still doing the Relaxed Mama Fall series in Boise, Idaho, or the Treasure Valley. If you are local to that area, please check the show notes and check out the upcoming events. I'm hosting one on Thursday, October 17th. It's with a pelvic floor therapist, and the theme is Don't Forget to Breathe. And on October 24th, I am also hosting myself and my wonderful friend and mentor, Pam Strain, are going to be talking on how to repurpose your passion through motherhood. And I think that both of those are going to be such great events and very needed. And also, I am speaking at a women's brunch at my church on October 19th, and it's in light of this podcast, Courage Over Comfort. So please feel free to check any of those out in the show notes if you are local to the area. I hope everybody has a blessed day, and I hope you enjoy this episode. Welcome to the Kindred Journey Podcast, the podcast where women share their experiences of stepping into courage when comfort is no longer an option. This is the podcast for connecting in community with women who have been shaped by the liberating to challenging seasons that life endures. I am your host, Lesley. I am a wife, mother, daughter, sister, and friend. I too have experienced these seasons in life, and I want you to know that you are surrounded by a community of courageous, real women here for you. I can't wait to connect, so grab your favorite beverage and join me on this kindred journey. Good morning, Cecilia. How are you today?
Good morning, Lesley. I'm good. I'm good. And I understand you're in California, so welcome. Welcome back to the state.
Thank you so much. Yes, it's perfect weather. I always end up talking about the weather. I don't know why. I feel like I turn into my mom sometimes. I'm like, my parents always talk about the weather, and here I am. Like, but no, it's just like the perfect fall. Like, I just love fall. It's my favorite time of year. So I think that's just why I'm relishing in it. It's just so beautiful here. So thank you for the warm welcome. And I have had the opportunity to connect with you through a podcasting course that we are currently in together. And if you wouldn't mind just sharing with the listeners a little bit of an introduction about yourself.
Sure. I'm Cecilia Curtis. First, I do want to say thank you, Lesley. We have connected and I've enjoyed our brief conversations together, but I just want to say thank you for creating this awesome space where women can kind of just be themselves and encourage one another and support one another. So thank you. It's already a joy just talking to you this morning.
Mm,
But I'm
you're
Cecilia
welcome.
Curtis. I'm Cecilia Curtis. I am a wife. I've been married to my best friend for 21 years. I am a mother. I have three little boys, 8, 6, and 4. So I'm definitely a boy mom. I was feeling really good about myself this morning because I actually like put on lipstick and yeah, so I'm definitely a boy mom. Let's see, I'm from Wilmington, Delaware, but I now
Wow.
live in Northern California by way of the United States Air Force. My husband is active duty, and in the last 20 something years, we've kind of moved all over. We've moved all over, and we're in California now, which I really enjoy. It's been great. It's been great. In the last 21 years, I've worked in different sectors. I've worked in nonprofit, I've worked for the United States government, I have worked in corporate America, and I've even worked in tech. That was my most recent job.
Wow.
But I stopped working in about January. The company I was working for actually got acquired, and we saw it was coming for a really long time. It was not a surprise in any way, but a bunch of us got let go. And I know that was really difficult for a lot of people, but for me, it really just felt like a blessing in disguise
Mm.
because I knew that it was time to do something different with my life, but I don't think that I would have done it if I had still been in that position. So I kind of needed a little push from God to do something different. And I'm loving life right now. I mean,
Oh, that's
I
good.
stopped working in January. Yeah. I stopped working in January. I started a podcast about friendship in March. And since that time, I've just been really intentional about doing the things I love with the people I love. So I've been intentional about reconnecting with friends, spending more time with family. I'm going on the field trips with my kids at school. And, I would honestly say that maybe I have less money right now, but I have so much more joy and peace and
Mhm.
happiness. So I'm enjoying this season. I really am.
I think that's so important. And thank you for sharing that. The intentionality behind who you are and what's bringing you joy. And like you said, as far as like, might not be making the money I was making, but I'm so much happier. And I think that that's something a lot of people are coming into awareness with, and that like you meet these milestones or these marks in your career or whatever, and it's like, okay, now what, versus like the contentment, the wholeness, the intentionality behind feeling full of life. I think that's just something I wanted to side note, so thank
Yeah.
you. And before we get started here, I just always love to share that this is a safe space for you to share your story. So everything that you do say is honored and respected. So thank you for taking the courage and the time and the vulnerability to be here to share your story.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. And if you wouldn't mind sharing a moment or season in your life where you had to step into courage when comfort was no longer an option.
Yeah, I thought a lot about this question. And I would say, honestly, it just took a lot of courage. I don't even know if courage is the right word, but maybe just not staying in a little bit of fear for
Mm.
me to just get married. And I say that not because I fear marriage. My parents have been married for over 50 years. My husband's parents were married for a really long time before my father-in-law passed away. But I was dating my husband for 4 years before he proposed. And that entire time, I knew that the military was in his future. That was
Mm.
tough for me to swallow, just knowing that that was going to be our life, moving around. But I loved him. I loved him. So at some point, I had to just be like, all right, we're going to do this. And we did it. Like, he's just so lovable and we have a great life together. So I don't know if that was really courage, but it definitely just took a little bit of a leap of faith for
Mm.
sure.
Yeah.
I would say another situation that came to mind, and again, I don't know if courage is the right word because when I explain the situation, you'll understand I was not the one who was really being courageous, but my husband and I lived overseas. We lived in Germany. And while we were there, my husband deployed for 6 months. He did the
Wow.
deployment and then he also had a season of training, which was probably about 4 months before he even deployed. So altogether, he was gone off and on for about 10 months. And we had a good life in Germany. I had a good job, I had friends, but I was still in Germany without my husband during that season. And I would just note I was not the one being courageous. Definitely my husband, the servicemen and women who were, fighting and defending our country, they were definitely the ones being courageous. But when I look back at that season and all of the things that happened while my husband was gone, I'm just really darn proud of myself. I'm proud of how I kept things going at home. I will note I did not have children at the time, so it was a bit easier for me than some other active duty spouses. But I was proud of myself. I met my husband when I was 17. We started dating when I was 18, got married at 23. I mean, I went away to college, but I never really truly lived on my own because I got
Mm.
married a little bit younger. So I was just proud of myself that I was doing all the things that needed to be done. I was taking care of the house, I was taking care of the car, I was going to work every day, I was living my life. And, my husband even joked while he was gone. He's like, I don't know, you seem happy. It seems like you're having fun. And I was like, no, 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 I miss you. I miss you. But I think what I felt was just proud of myself because I always wondered what it would be like to just be a grown up by myself. And in that season, I felt like I'm finally doing it. And I missed him. And there were some things that happened. If you talk to other military spouses, you'll know that it feels like when your spouse is gone, whether it's deployment or TDY, it feels like that's when all of life happens. It just gets thrown at you in that season when they're gone. And that's kind of what happened to me. I had a couple of health scares, challenges. And I'd say that with a little bit of caution because everything turned out fine. But while
Mhm.
my husband was gone, I ended up having a breast lump. And it was very scary for a couple of weeks to just not know what that lump was about, So I ended up having to go in for a mammogram and go in for a biopsy and have all this testing done. And it just really felt scary. And I think at that time, it would have been nice to lean on my husband for comfort, but I didn't have him to lean on, And even when I talked to him about it over Skype or however we were communicating while he was deployed, I was hesitant to share too much because I knew he was already in a stressful environment. So I wouldn't say that it was courageous on my part. I would say it was more, I just did what needed to be done. Like I hope I can say this on your podcast, but I just put on my big girl panties and did what I needed to do. I made sure there were friends that were kind of there to support me, and they did support me. I had another medical procedure while my husband was gone, and it was not necessarily planned, but it was one of those things that wasn't serious enough. My mom kept saying, "Do you want me to come? Do you want me to come?" But it wasn't serious enough that I needed my mom to fly from Delaware to Germany. But it was
Mm.
serious enough that I would have liked my husband to be there, to hold my hand and tell me everything was going to be okay, and to be the last face before I went under and the first face when I came out of anesthesia. But that just wasn't an option. So I had one friend who went with me to the procedure. She got me back home. I had another friend who spent the night and took care of me until the morning. But I think of those situations when I first got married, and then when these weird things happened when my husband was deployed, when maybe it wasn't courage, but it was just something that I would have typically wanted to lean upon my husband, and that just wasn't an option. And looking back, I don't feel any kind of way about it other than proud of myself that I got through it and I was a big girl. I was a big
Mm.
girl.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And yes, I want to highlight, I consider it courage because I can relate in a similar uh, family circumstance that we're in, because it's something that we've talked about on the podcast here is courage isn't just chosen courage. It can sometimes be forced courage.
Mm,
And I see now why friendships is the highlight of your podcast, because that's what you had to lean into in those moments and seasons that you didn't have your husband or your mom or additional support from loved ones when you really kind of needed it. And I think,
right.
like you said, you getting married, you knew that the military was going to be a part of your future. So that was yes, and thank you to your husband and his service. And this month I want to highlight first responder, military, law enforcement wives, because while they are being courageous and putting their life on the line for our country, for our community every single day and not knowing if they're going to come home, there's somebody back
at home waiting for them to come home. And that takes courage too,
Mm,
because, and that's what I want to honor this month, because myself being a wife of a wildland firefighter, there have been moments and circumstances like you're explaining where you have to just step into doing that thing because you don't have another choice other than
right.
showing up the best way you can. So I just want to highlight, like, you are so courageous, and thank you for exuding your humbleness about it, but it is so courageous to move to another country and to be pretty much by yourself while your husband's on deployment. That's scary.
Yeah.
That takes courage. And to go through health scares when you don't, like you said, knowing the outcome of it now, but when you were going through it, you didn't know what the outcome was going to be. And that is scary. That takes courage to step into. And while your mom offered to come out and be with you and to support you through that time, you leaned on friends. You did lean on that support of other human beings that wasn't your husband at the time. And now I see why friendships are the highlight of your podcast.
Yeah.
Because it's
I love
important.
my friends. They're great. They're so
Yeah.
important. So important. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's something that, again, maybe you could share this a little bit, especially knowing, like, now that you are a boy mom, I'm a boy mom as well. Having kids and knowing that you're going to move, and like right, there's this conscious awareness about what is the future holds, but you don't know how it's going to unfold. So maybe you could elaborate on that a little bit with, you say you're in California now, you're from Delaware, you were in Germany, maybe a little bit about your life story as a military wife. I'm sorry, my
Yeah.
toddler is in the background,
That's okay.
wanting
I
to come
completely
out here.
understand.
He
I
wants
want to
to be
meet
a
your
part of the.
toddler. I feel like we've had a really good run of it. We've had really great bases where we've been. And I was talking to another friend a couple days ago. I do think that being able to say we've been to great bases, part of it is we really just truly have. We've lived in Northern California, we've been in Miami, we've been in Germany and Japan. Those are really great places. However, there were other people in those places who thought they were crummy places. And another friend and I were talking, and I think it really comes down to mindset. I think part of it is, what can I do to make this the best experience for me? And in my case, it was really about finding those relationships that are going to help make my life richer and more meaningful. Um, I didn't have kids though. My husband and I have had all of our kids in Northern California. So I was older having kids. Part of that was choice, part of it wasn't. When I was very young, my husband and I, he was in like school, I was in school. We were doing that whole thing together, graduate school and training. So we didn't really feel like that was the right time. But then when we first, started trying, there were some fertility issues. I'm saying all that to say we didn't have the challenge of relocating every 2 to 3 years with toddlers in tow. We didn't have the challenge of having to, start a new school every year. Those weren't our challenges. All of our challenges, or all of our children were born here in Northern California. But now my husband's getting closer to retirement, and I'm like, oh, shoot, are we going to have to move the kids? Wait a second, where are the kids going to go when we're packing up the house? Those weren't things that I considered. And I would say to people that was their life and that was their situation. In some ways, I'm like, man, I'm sorry. Like, I just didn't get it. I didn't get it at the time. I was definitely um, that military spouse who we just bopped around. And, when we were in Japan, I was hanging out in Tokyo, and some of the other spouses they didn't have that freedom because they did
Mhm.
have the little kids at home and they didn't have the comfort of their spouse being there. So, to a lot of them, and I've gone back and I've talked to some of my friends who were in that season. To some of them, I'm just like, man, I'm sorry. I didn't get it. I totally
Yeah.
didn't get it. We were doing life and I thought we were doing the same life, but it turns out we really weren't.
hmm
Um, so yeah.
And that's okay.
I
That's it,
Yeah,
it has to be experienced to be learned, right? It's something that
right.
you cannot, I mean, as many times as people were telling me with my first, rest when the baby rests. I'm like, well, nothing's going to get done. No, truly, I rest when the baby rests now. It's like you have to live through that experience to understand it and learn through
Right.
it. You can't be taught it. It's not something that can be taught. It has to be experienced. And so for you to have that awareness and to share that with your friends, and I think it's so beautiful. And like you said, something I love is like perspective is everything. And you said some
Hmm.
people were in those same exact locations as you were, and they had a totally different experience. And mindset probably had a more negative mindset. And like you said, you wanted to immerse yourself and make the best of your experience. And we have the choice, right? We can
Right.
choose to embrace it or we can choose to resist it. And guess what's going to be a heck of a lot harder and take way more energy? It's going to be to resist it. So I think that's such a
Right.
beautiful message that whether you realize that or not, like I think that's something in life, not just a military wife and traveling, but just in life in general. That's so
Yeah.
important to have maybe not a positive perspective, but just like I'm going to make the best out of this. There are going to be hard days. There are going to be times where I'm not going to want to be here. I want to go home, and what does home look like for you, Cecilia? Like what do you consider, especially being somebody who's traveled and lived in different countries? Uh, I think I shared with you, I've been in pretty much a Northern California bubble my almost entire life. And then I did go down to the Central Valley and then I'm now in Idaho. So it's like I have not been out of the Pacific Northwest western side of the United States. So what does home look like to you? What does that comfort look like for you when you're stepping into these seasons of courage?
I would say at this point, home is where I am with my husband and my kids. It's where I feel like I'm loved and have some sense of community. It's so interesting that you ask that question because my husband and he's getting very close to retirement. And we've been asking ourselves that question for the last 2 years. Where is home? What is going to be,
Mm,
what is that going to look like for us when we do have the choice of where we're going to live? So, I have my family in the Northeast primarily. My husband's family is in the Southeast primarily. And here we are on the West Coast where we've been for many years and where all of our children were born. My kids are California kids.
mhm.
It's strange to me, but the way they dress, the way they talk, their expectations of weather, they're like, it's freezing. No, it's 68 degrees. It's not freezing. You are such a
Right,
California kid.
right.
Um, so we're trying to weigh all that and balance that. But I can tell you, I feel most at home when I'm with my family and when I know I kind of like the feeling of maybe going to the grocery store and seeing someone I know, whether it's from church or from the school. Doesn't mean we need to have a long conversation in the grocery store, but I like that feeling of community.
Mhm,
And I don't know, I guess now this feels like home. That doesn't mean I can't build this community somewhere else, but it takes time. That
mhm.
takes time to build. Yeah. But
Yeah.
home is with my family.
Yeah, I think it's so important. And now that I have established my own family, outside of my family, because we live similar to you in a spot where we don't have any of that family, but like to lean on that community, I think is so important in in the line of being first responder, military, active duty, any of these courageous careers that are husbands, or if there's husbands of wives that are in the military and active duty. And I think it's just so important to lean on that community. And I think that's something that is very strong. Like we're in the fire community and we have friends with other kids, us fire, I call them fire wives, we lean on each
Hmm.
other in the summer. When our husbands are gone and we have play dates with our kids and we lean into each other versus isolate from it all, and I think it can, like you said, it's your choice to choose how you want to approach it. And so I love that sense of home and safetyness is seeing somebody familiar in a public place or leaning
Right.
into that community from church or whatever it might be for you. So I think that's an important piece. And I think especially through like the COVID time, I think we crave community and intentional conversation more than ever. I love it. I've always been,
Hmm.
that's kind of why I'm like, well, a podcast is a great thing to start because I love talking to people.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's so important to have that sense of community no matter wherever you are. And like you said, you can build it. It takes time and intentionality and patience. But it can
Yes.
be built wherever you may be um, along the way.
I agree. I agree. I think the intentional piece, it doesn't mean that every single thing you do to build community is going to work out. Like maybe you go to a church and it's not the right church for you. So instead of giving up, find a different church. Or
Right.
maybe you go to the hiking group and it's not quite the right group of people for you. Maybe they're hiking 20 miles and you're like, whoa, I was good with 3. You know, find a different hiking group,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think you have to be intentional and you have to be okay with maybe failing once or twice. Don't take it personally, but maybe you fail once or twice. That wasn't the group for you, that wasn't your tribe, that wasn't your place.
Hmm.
But that doesn't mean it's not out there. You just have to keep looking for it. You just have to keep looking.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's so important. And the point of failure, I think, especially because I'm in the stage of littles, and they're learning to walk, crawl, do all these things. They don't quit, but I think as adults we like to get too comfortable sometimes, and we don't
Hmm.
want to expand and grow and put ourselves out there and be in uncomfortable situation. We want to feel safe, right? And so I
Right.
think it's important to realize like I am safe doing this uncomfortable thing. I am safe putting myself out there. And to remind yourself that you're safe. And I've been really kind of exploring the nervous system and dysregulation with that. And I think it's something as when you step into courage, it's whether it's forced or chosen, it can feel unsafe. I think it
Hmm.
is something to remind, like, I am going to be okay. And like you kind of
Right.
shared after your health scares, it's like, you know what the outcome is now, but like you didn't at that time. And like it was uncertain, it was scary, it
Right.
was fearful. So I think it's just as you try new things or immerse yourself in these new groups or communities, like I am safe, I'm going to be okay, like whatever the outcome is, and try it on for size. And if it doesn't work, try something different, until it feels
Exactly.
like it. Yeah.
Yeah. Don't give up. Just try something different. Just try something
Try.
different.
I love
Keep
that. I
trying.
love
Keep trying.
keep trying. And oh my gosh, my toddler is in there with his grandma and he has her cowboy hat on and his diaper. He looks quite he looks like he's ready to go for a horseback ride. We're at my family has a ranch up here. So we're enjoying all because we live in Boise, which it's we're my husband and I are both from the country, so we enjoy the country, the slower paced
Yeah.
life. And so I think my son is also enjoying it as well.
It's a peaceful life. It's a peaceful
Hmm.
life.
It
And
is.
I think this season right now, like I said, I'm not working. I'm not saying that's for everyone by any
Hmm.
means, but what it has forced me to do is slow down.
Hmm.
And I think some people, and it's built into our culture, but we're scared to slow down. We're scared to not be busy. We're scared to not be chasing all the things that we're supposed to chase. And I'm really happy right now just being, I'm not completely still, but I'm happy being slightly more still.
Hmm.
So I'm not in the country doing that, but I feel like mentally that's where I
Hmm.
am. And I think a lot of times when we're connected to nature, like at your family's place in Northern California, it just forces you to slow down. Just
Yes.
slow down, slow down.
Yes, it is a mental piece, but it's also a physical and it's
Yes.
emotional and it's spiritual too. I feel
Right.
like for me connecting with God in nature is, we do go to church, but connecting with him on a hike or at our family's ranch is something that I feel the most connected to because he made all of this. He made the
Right.
the trees, the soil, the grass, the water. And I think it's just so important to slow down. And that's why I chose to stay at our ranch where there actually is no cell service and no Wi-Fi.
Hmm.
And so I'm actually up at my folks' place because I'm like, I need to get on this call. But
Wow.
it's just so nice to just physically decompartmentalize. Because I even feel
Yeah.
like when the Wi-Fi's on, there's still a frequency there, you can still feel it. And so it's really nice to just disconnect and slow down. And like you said, it's
Yeah.
built into our culture, and good for you for being happy and embracing where you're at right now, and knowing that, kind of like what you said, keep trying, is that nothing lasts forever. Like this
Hmm.
too will change. Like that's
Hmm.
just, change is the only constant.
Hmm.
So I think that that's so important to recognize as well, when it's okay to slow down, it's okay to take breaks, it's okay to pause instead of, like you said, this go, do more, climb the ladder. It's okay to pause. And I
Yeah.
think we don't do that enough.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, well, I do always like to ask a follow-up question to everybody, or as far as like looking back on your moments and seasons of courage, what would you say, hindsight 2020, looking back, what would you have told your old self knowing what you know now?
I would say relax, have faith, and it'll all be fine.
Mm.
It'll be fine. There are going to be seasons that feel like it's not going to be fine, but that season might be a month. That season might be a year. It might be 2 years. But when you look back at your life, and it's not like I'm 100 years old, but when you look back, you'll realize it was just a blip. It'll
Mhm.
all be fine. Yeah.
Mhm. I think that is so important. And is there a way that you would share that with your old self, as far as like a practice to implement, just out of curiosity, like to just, like we were talking about, pausing or slowing down, like is there a way that you would implement that, your current version of yourself, would you share that with your old self? Does that make sense? Like, hey, if you do this, like this would help you get through this season. Like,
That is a really good question. And I'm thinking about my younger self. I don't know what I would have done.
mm,
I was just like a stressy person, you know?
mhm,
And I definitely had the wisdom of older people. My
mhm,
mother-in-law is very wise and she's very faithful and she's always like, it'll be fine, it'll all work out. And she was always telling me about this the season in her life where she felt like it wasn't going to work out. And then she looked back and she's like, everything's great, it's fine.
mhm.
And now I probably sound more like her, but I didn't want to hear it from her 20 years ago.
Right, right.
Even though everything she said was 100% right, I didn't want to hear it from her. I didn't want to hear it from my parents. I didn't want to hear it from my husband, who learned from her to just be super positive. And so he's bopping around being super positive in his 20s. And I was like, I don't want to be positive. So I don't know. I don't know what it would have taken. I mean, I was already in church, a person of faith. Um, Maybe it goes back to what you said. Maybe it's just in some ways you do need to go through it. You do need to experience it. And it is part of the journey. And I think a lot of people would tell their younger selves something similar. Like, it's going to be okay. That shirt that you're stressed out about that doesn't fit at 26, at 36, you're going to be like, man, I wish I could fit that shirt from 26, you know?
Right.
So, but you don't know that. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what people say. You're just going to kind of feel it and experience it and have to go through it. So I think I was doing some of the things. I was running and enjoying nature, but maybe just still being part of the culture that tells you to do more, get more, want more. And I'm still part of that culture, but I don't know. I'm just trying to
It's a
slow down
divide.
and
Yeah, it's a divide though, because like I call, like God nods, Holy Spirit, like inside me, I'm feeling torn because culture is this way. And like you
hmm.
said, as a mom of littles, like I'm really trying to like stop and pause and sit and play with my kids, like really slow down. But that's it's like such a resistance pull sometimes, because I know
Right,
inside this is what I want to do, but I still have to perform at my job. I still have
right,
to, it's such an opposite, and I feel like it's a constant tug and pull on my heart to do
right.
those things. So I can totally understand and relate with what you're saying. And I think just those micro moments of pausing, whether it's sitting and drinking a morning cup of coffee in silence, or like you said, going for a run or being out in nature, like taking those micro pieces and pausing, I think is so important. And whether you consciously are aware of it or unconsciously aware of you doing these things, I think it builds on each other. And something that I have kind of discovered through several conversations on this podcast is courage is like a muscle or like a ring.
Mm,
Like like, you have to experience it, and then it's like, okay, you do something hard, okay, it gets a little bit bigger. Okay, like it's hard, growth is hard, change is hard. Like it's just kind of this like contrast and expand kind of with your courage muscle or your courage circle or whatever you want to call it. So it's just it's growth, it's momentum, it's experiences, So I think that that's everything that you said is just all, it ties so beautifully into courage. And you are courageous, Cecilia,
oh,
for
thank you.
being a military wife and traveling and moving across the world and knowing that home is with your boys and your husband, especially as your husband is going to be retiring in the next few years. I think you're grounded in that. And I think that that's so important because you can make home wherever you are.
Right. Right. Well, thank you. Thank you so
Oh
much
my
for this
gosh.
opportunity to just
Yes.
kind of talk about life and yeah, help me understand even for myself, like what's important and what's not. Even this
Mhm.
conversation has helped me get closer to understanding what's important and what's not in my own life. So thank you.
Mm. I'm so grateful. Thank you for taking the time to connect with me. This is what I love the most. One of
Yeah.
the one of my most favorite things in life. So
Yeah.
if you don't mind sharing where people can find you and listen to your podcast and what it's called, and maybe reach out to you if they have any questions for you.
Yeah, I'd love to hear from some of your listeners. You can find me at the Friendship Tour podcast. That's on Facebook, Instagram, even on YouTube. Yeah, just reach out. I'd love to connect.
Wonderful. Okay, Cecilia, I'll be sure to include it in the show notes as well.
Thank you so much. And I look forward to hanging out again sometime, maybe in class.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for joining me and listening to the Kindred Journey podcast. If this episode resonated with you, please consider taking the time to rate and review the podcast and share this episode with family and friends who you think might enjoy it. Your positive feedback helps me reach more courageous women like you. This is my passion project, so without you, I wouldn't be here doing this, and I deeply appreciate your support. Until next time.